I'm delighted today to have Ann Johnson with us, and she's going to talk about a very interesting concept that she has. And I'm going to let Ann do her own introduction about her background and how she fits into this whole thing. But she is a master at content curation and putting together amazing educational programs, and I've learned a tremendous amount from you. I aspire to be you, Ann. So thank you very much.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. That's a lot to live up to. Thank you, Suzanne. Thanks for still being here and still being alert. And I see lots of shiny eyeballs pointed in my direction. So happy to be here with you today. I'm an education and learning consultant. I hung out my own shingle about a year ago, call myself Full Spectrum Learning Solutions. Previously, though, I was on the education team at PCMA, so I'm a colleague of Jason Paganesi, whom you saw in a previous presentation. Before that, I was a meeting planner. So I come to a meeting planner who also wore the hat of developing education for my meetings. So I come to the education and learning arena, honestly, I think. And I just wanted to mention, Suzanne said some very kind things about me. Me being here today, I think, is karmic payback, because for many, many, many years in my career, I've spent a lot of time bossing around speakers, including Suzanne, who has spoken for PCMA at Convening Leaders in the past. So she brought me here, and now the shoe's on the other foot. I am terrified right now, I will tell you that, to be speaking to you. So hopefully I'll get over it, and we'll carry on and share some interesting information today. So I'm here to speak about educational models, and specifically about disrupting some of the traditional educational models. Also here to talk about sandwiches. So when I'm done today, I hope that you will be in the position of considering blended learning strategies for engaging your members year-round. Not just blended in the overall strategy, meaning we're going to do some virtual, we're going to do some face-to-face, but within the very same learning event, I would ask you to consider blending the learning within a singular event. Also ask you to think about providing greater value to your learners by offering customization of the content. I think that we can all probably agree that customization in all aspects of member services is really the wave of the future, not just in education. By customizing, as well as many of the other speakers have talked about, the organization itself gains some very valuable business intel, what your people want, when they want it, how they want to consume it. So there's great value to customizing your learning content as well. So what's a virtual content sandwich anyway? Well, the short answer is it's just a catchy little nickname for a project I'm working on. I was talking with Suzanne about it. She got excited. I got excited. Here I am today speaking to you. And then I thought a little bit more about it, and I really think there's a there. I think there's something to the virtual content sandwich concept. So let's just take a minute and gaze upon this sea of sandwiches. Delicious, delicious sandwiches. Looks tasty, yes? But what's so special about a sandwich? Well, I think the sandwich is the perfect food because it cuts across all socioeconomic divisions. It's food for the people. You have sandwiches with posh ingredients. You have sandwiches with very humble ingredients. It's all good. It's a sandwich. Sandwiches are ultimately customizable. Have it your way. That's the essence of what a sandwich is. It's what you want when you want it. Sandwich is portable. The sandwich revolves around you as the diner. It's not like you have to make an appointment to go and have this sandwich like you do with some fine dining situations. The sandwich goes with you. The sandwich is also time variable. You can have some now, you can have some later. There are endless options. So what's the link then between the delicious sandwich and professional education? I'm going to suggest that we borrow the structure and attributes of the sandwich and apply it to next wave learner-focused professional education, starting with a savory learning experience you can sink your teeth into. I think it's really about a dynamic and compelling learning event. This is the main event. For me, this is usually a face-to-face event. I think it is possible to have your main event be a virtual happening, but I think that's really, really, really hard to do. So when I talk about the center of the sandwich, the savory learning experience, I'm usually talking about a face-to-face learning experience. And that face-to-face event is sandwiched between virtual content, 2 slices of bread before and after the main event. So what kind of virtual content are we talking about? What kind of savory filling should the learning be? We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But let me first put this in non-sandwich terms. We're really talking here about a blended learning experience that extends the life of the event, which is what we all want, and it ideally will include a whole variety of ways for members, attendees, consumers, potential members to engage with your content. So this sounds a little complicated. What's wrong with regular education anyway? Do I really even want a virtual content sandwich? Well, there's nothing wrong with regular education. But I suggest that we look closely at your end goals when you're planning your education and learning events. What is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to achieve? How are you trying to change the attendee behavior? If you want them to do something or to engage in a different way, you really might want to consider a virtual content sandwich, and I'll explain more. So content is awesome. Members expect you to have the latest content, the latest information about the thing that you're specialists in. They want it to be easily accessible, and we've heard a lot today about different ways to do that. But content by itself, sometimes that's enough, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you really want, your goal is for your attendees, your members, to engage with the content, to think about the content, to take action, to do things with the content that are going to improve their own situation and your organization's ability to serve them. So content does not by itself equal education, and education by itself does not equal learning. Content, as I said, pretty great. If we kick it up a little bit to the next level, education, to me, that's about presenting content. That's a little more dynamic. That's someone sharing their input about the content with you as the learner. It often takes the form of the sage from the stage, some big subject matter expert who knows everything, who's going to, share their knowledge with you, and you're just going to sit there like a sponge and absorb it. Education isn't always like this. I'm making some extreme statements here just for fun. But I think when we start to talk about learning, this is where I get interested. Today, I think we're focused a little more on learning than on education. And the distinction to me is that learning is more active. Education can be a little bit passive. Again, you have the sage on the stage who's pouring their knowledge over you, and you soak it up like a sponge. Maybe it means something to you. Maybe you can use it later. Maybe you can't. But I think learning is the, for true learning to happen, the participant must be very active in the outcome. They must want it. They must work for it. They have to make it real for themselves. Context and connections. These are a big part of the learning experience. Context. The education might be some smart person giving you the theory behind something. Okay, that's cool. I didn't know that. The context comes in the learning piece where you say, well, now wait a minute. What does that mean for me in my situation, in my organization? What's the context of that information? How can I use it to be better on the job tomorrow? The connections are also something that are a very important piece of the learning experience. And that's not only connecting with the content and manipulating it and making it work for you, but I think the connections you make with the other learners in the room. Everyone, I hear this all the time. The best part of any conference happens in the conversations in the hallway or over the coffee station. It's not necessarily what happens in the classroom. So let's work on that. Let's make that intentional. What can we do about making the connections between the people who attend your event, the connections between the content and the learner? How can we enhance this more in a learning environment? I've listed a few other things here that are important to a learning situation. Won't read them all for you, except, again, you'll see customization shows up in here. I think this is very important. Again, people want to know what's in it for them. What does this concept, this content, what's in it for me? How can I use it? And I think the smart and savvy organization that provides educational experiences is trying to help answer those questions. So let me ask again, do I really want a virtual content sandwich? Well, the research shows that active participation and creating personal relevancy helps learners achieve these desired outcomes: attendee engagement, learning retention, improved job performance. The virtual content sandwich approach gives you a whole variety of ways to help your learners do that for themselves. Layering content about content, different points of view on that content. these are all different ways that people can dig deeper into the sandwich, the learning experience that you provided to them, and make it real for themselves. So if your answer is yes, you want engagement, you want retention, you want improved job performance, you probably want a virtual content sandwich at least once in a while. If you don't, take a break. We'll be back. So what is the recipe for a virtual content sandwich? And the big answer is it depends. Every single element of a virtual content sandwich is variable. You can mix and match everything. In fact, you should. There is no one right way to do it. So the recipe, the variability, it depends. What does it depend on? Well, what the members need. Ask them. I am continually shocked by to find that some organizations don't ask their members much at all. And I don't think that's probably true of any of the organizations here, because clearly there's a lot of innovation and interaction and engagement and forward thinking happening in this room. But I've worked for a lot of organizations where they never do a member needs analysis or anything. You know, it doesn't have to be as formal as that, but I think if you want to know how to meet your members' needs, you've got to ask them. I think you also have to look at your own organization's needs. As was mentioned earlier, sometimes there's news that's important for them to have, whether they know it or not. So your organization's needs factor into this as well. Your organization's resources and capacity. This is hard to do. We're going to talk about in a few minutes why this is hard to do and how to overcome the challenges. But it takes a lot of work. So as you're figuring out if you are really going to create this virtual content sandwich, take a close, hard look at your resources and capacity. And then it also depends on your master plan. Not everything requires a virtual content sandwich. Some things are fine as a standalone. They're fine just the way they are. So I think you need to look at your big plan for education and learning within your association and figure out which elements need or would benefit from a little tweaking, a little layering of content. So let's start with the filling of the sandwich. As I said, for me, I'm a face-to-face girl in a digital world. I think there's something magical that happens in a face-to-face environment, face-to-face connection, especially around learning. I get to see the smiles on people's faces. I get to see maybe when I lose people's attention. But just the connection between peers is amazing. That's, again, where the excitement happens. And so for me, the filling is what it's all about. I also think, in sandwich terms, we really, it's about the filling, even there too. We talk about a roast beef sandwich. We don't talk about a rye bread sandwich with beef, It's really about what's in the middle. And that's what's going to hold this learning experience together. So the elements I look for in dynamic learning experiences face-to-face are listed on the screen. Learner-driven. Make sure it's about what they want to know. Again, if you're asking the questions, you know what they want to know and you know where their knowledge gaps are. Learner-driven. Experiential. Some people will flee the room the minute you say experiential or hands-on. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. So there's different degrees of experiential. You have to know your audience and know what they can take. You can push them a little bit, but it's good. That also, it depends. Lots of discussion, connecting with peers, providing the context so that the theories make sense in practice. We talked about that. I like dynamic sessions that are really about tapping into the wisdom of the group. I'm no sage on the stage. I, like to really tap into the collective wisdom of the group. Put a problem out and say, okay, you're all a bunch of smart people. How would you solve this problem that's facing our industry today? Let them go. Give them some tools. Give them some prompts. Give them some facilitation. The exciting thing, the content that comes out of that rich, vibrant, dynamic discussion, to me, is the most powerful content you're going to get. So this is what floats my boat. I love all this stuff. Love the face-to-face. So let me ask you, with regard to a face-to-face session, can the information exchange be done ahead of time? I think when we think about traditional classroom education, we are expecting someone smart to stand up in front and tell us some new things that we didn't know. Can that happen before people even get to the classroom? Yes. The short answer is yes. It doesn't always work. It's not always the right answer, but sometimes it is. Sometimes you can provide the knowledge transfer ahead of time so that what happens in the classroom is that dynamic discussion, the connections, the context, the solutions, the discussion. Again, it's not the right answer for everything all the time, but it's something pretty exciting when it works. So, all right, slice one. Let's talk about the virtual content, the virtual bread for this virtual content sandwich. Again, there are no limits. These are just a few options. Anything you can think of that makes sense for the learning and for your members, for your, that's all, it's all good. It's all possible. So a couple things, educational content on the front end. Do some virtual content before your face-to-face event. You can do some new educational content, particularly if you're trying to do what I suggested a minute ago, which is do the knowledge transfer ahead of time, save the good stuff, the context and connections for the classroom. This could be brand new educational content that's been created just specially for this face-to-face experience, a la Khan Academy, all those wonderful learning videos where your children are learning algebra at home with these videos, and then when they get into the classroom, they can practice, or they can work with their teacher on coaching areas where they have gaps, or they can discuss, the meaning of these things. I don't know if you discuss a lot of meaning about algebra, but with most of the professional education we're doing these days, you certainly could. So creating new educational content on the front end, that's one way to prepare a slice of digital content bread. Old education. If you have in your LMS some wonderful captured content from previous conferences or related topics, link it to your session description, link it to the promotional materials for your upcoming face-to-face learning event. Give people a chance to achieve the same baseline, the same foundation of knowledge when they walk into the room by referring to what you already have. It also shines a spotlight on how your association has got their back, basically, because you've already got this great content that exists already, and you want to share it with them to bring them up to speed. Other types of virtual content pre-event, articles, white papers, blogs, speaker extras, other ways that people can get engaged with the content, gain some knowledge before they even get into the room. You can ask your learners, your members, to contribute to the content, either through polling in advance or through social media. Hey, what's your experience with topic X? You may gain some great case studies or examples that can be folded into the content itself in the classroom. It's also a great way to help have people self-identify where their gaps are. I know these three things about contract clauses, but I'm shaky on this. Well, maybe we should cover that in that face-to-face session. Gets a little tricky sometimes. People don't always want to admit what they don't know, but there are ways to get around that. Okay, slice two, the post-event virtual content. Again, the only limit is your imagination. Here are just a few examples. You could do, as PCMA does, a themed virtual event, like 3 weeks after the big annual meeting. They do a rebroadcast, and it's just a full day of captured sessions, and there's an MC and there's moderated chat. What I like, especially from the learning front, is a follow-up webinar to provide a deeper dive of the content that was covered in the session itself. Usually you can skim the surface or maybe go a couple inches deep in a 60 or 75-minute session. Some people are going to want more. So then, 3 weeks later, drive them to a follow-up webinar where you're going to get very deep and very detailed into that. You can, again, share some of the pre-existing learning resources you have in your LMS or other content pools within your organization. Sometimes they're great articles from your association magazine that can be linked as a follow-up or continued interest. Take them down other avenues of interest. Sometimes, especially if you're doing a very dynamic session where you have attendees working on a project together, they're co-creating in that space, in that classroom. They're finding that answer to an industry problem that you challenge them with. Share it back. That's all you have to do. Capture the document, put a little analysis on it. Just a list of takeaways isn't always the best answer, but there's usually a lot of people, smart people in your organization who will say what it means. Share that back and then open up a discussion group. Allow people to respond to and react to the takeaways that you've already provided. Outreach with job aids and performance prompts. This is a good one. Again, if learning retention is important to the organization, you need to help people do it. And continued outreach, not just one time. Hey, don't forget, hope you learned a lot at the meeting. But what if 3 months after the meeting you do some outreach and maybe you've got a video nugget attached some excellent moment from the conference or live event that you did. And you also say, now we asked you to make action plans, or we know you had some great ideas that occurred to you at the event, and we were pretty sure you wanted to implement them when you got back home. How's that going? Is there anything we can help with? Contact so-and-so for more information on this. Or, hey, did you know here's a great resource pool over there? Just little ways, and maybe it's a 3-month outreach and then 6 months. Multiple outreaches, I think people are surprised by that as a follow-up to a conference. Sometimes there's one, sometimes there's none. What if you take it further and you really demonstrate that you are the go-to resource for people there? I think that could be very powerful. I will also say that the post-event virtual content is where things quite frequently fall apart. It's easy to talk about it. It's easy to plan it. It's easy to plan on the front end because you're so excited about getting ready for the main event. Once that's done, you're kind of exhausted. You're kind of, organizationally, you're moving on to the next thing already. It's a little bit harder to follow up with this post-event virtual content. I'm sure some people are doing it very well. I think there's a huge potential here for people to really own this space and to create a lot of value for their members. The other thing I want to say about this is market and promote it. If you're doing post-event virtual content, tell people about it. Don't just hope they'll stumble upon it. And don't just have the speaker mention it in the classroom. I think this should be a full court press in the organization. If you're doing this cool thing, if you're creating a virtual content sandwich, tell people about it and tell them what's in it for them, why they should take the time out of their day to do the follow-up. Because, again, this is an area where we don't always talk about what we're doing. We think people are going to get it on their own. Sometimes they do. More often, a little reminder about what you're trying to do and why it matters to them is very helpful. So those were just a few examples of different kinds of virtual content that you could use to sandwich your live event. But there's all kinds of bread. Experiment. I want to mention just a couple of things I'm working on right now. I'm pretty jazzed about them. I think they're kind of fun. But again, just examples. So I'm working on an educational session for PCMA's conference in January, and it's about the very sexy topic of government regulations and compliance, right? So what we're doing in the advance, the pre-event virtual content slice of bread, we are linking, we're making available all sorts of previously captured content. Every other session that we've ever done that we captured about government regulations and compliance, linked to the session description. People can get up to speed. They can see what was discussed last year. We don't go too far back because these things change in this area quite frequently. We also dip into the magazine archives and the blog archives, and smart people who've worked with our organization before who have written something interesting. We'll attach all of that on the front end so that people, hopefully attendees will take advantage of all this great information ahead of time, come to the classroom with a little bit of knowledge. In the classroom, the face-to-face event, we actually have 2 face-to-face events. One is a sage from the stage. He's a subject matter expert who's going to give an update. What's new in this field since the last time we talked? Now, last time we talked was part of that captured video. I instructed him, don't repeat everything that you talked about that last time. It's there. A lot of people in the room will not have seen it. You remind them that it's there, and you keep going from where you are now. What you're doing is what's new now in the past year. Also, face-to-face, we're having some robust peer discussion groups on a variety of individual compliance and regulation issues. Peer-driven, solutions-focused, peers solving situations for peers. So many benefits to that kind of a situation, including the fact that after everyone goes home, you have a sense of who you are talking to who is really knowledgeable about what topic. So if in 3 months I'm having a problem in an area that I know you were very expert in, I'm probably going to call you up and ask you for some help at that point. So the post-event virtual content slice of bread, we will create a series of deep dive webinars, one for each of those specific regulations or compliance issues. One of the benefits of the on-site peer-to-peer discussion groups is they're going to identify the areas where they still need a whole lot more help. I mean, there will be some active, they know a lot, there'll be some active solutions sharing in the room, but they're also going to say, you know what, nobody here has a handle on topic X. So we know we have to create a very deep dive on topic X. We're going to capture that too, and that will be part of the next year's pre-event captured content. So I guess that it sounded sexy in my head, maybe not so much out loud, but just a different way to try to mix and match the pieces here. One other example, this is a session on contracts. The speaker can't be at my face-to-face event. So what we're doing is we're doing a quiz in the event mobile app. So that's kind of so the advanced piece of virtual content is to promote the fact that we're going to eventually be doing some education around contracts. And and we're promoting the fact that you can take this quiz and compete with your peers in the mobile app at the face-to-face event. And there will be, oh, you scored, you got this question right. 85% of other respondents did not get it right. Yay, you. So people like the competition, the gamification elements. There'll be a leaderboard. People can see how well they're doing. This also informs the instructor. She's going to be able to look at this later and say, wow, everybody did really, or has some knowledge gaps in this area, that area, the other area. And then she's going to do a post-event webinar that will focus on just the areas that have been indicated where people need a lot more help. I think that's pretty cool as well. So again, lots of different ways to do this. Extends the content, gives layering opportunities, and keeps your attendees engaged and coming back to your organization for all kinds of interaction and learning. So let's talk about condiments for a minute. This is also an important part of the sandwich. Optional little extras during the main event that will customize the learning experience. Classroom technology. We've got some great classroom technology going on right now. We can watch the Twitter stream. You can use technology in the classroom for speaker Q&A. You can use SlideShare, where folks get to annotate their own copies of the slides that are being displayed. I was there when MTV was launched, and I remember pop-up video was a very cool thing. So you'd be watching your favorite Wham video, and there would pop up something on the bottom and tell you George Michael's favorite color is purple, and it was stupid, but it was really cool. You could do something like that as well if you wanted to. Not everybody wants this, and this is part of the customization part for your learners. Some learners want nothing but that. Others say, that's fine. Okay, but you have something for everyone. People select what they want, and you're giving them all these options to personalize their learning experience. Again, you can totally mix and match all of this to suit your taste and your attendees' taste. All right, so I think a parallel can be drawn between the way foodies approach dining and this style of virtual content sandwich education. So before foodies go out to a special meal, there's a lot of anticipation. They're building some buzz. They're excited. Their friends are all excited. They all know they're going to Alinea or to whatever, some fancy or low-end fancy, some special dining experience. They can read about it ahead of time. They can read reviews of the restaurant, critics' reviews. They can read Yelp reviews, different perspectives on the same thing. They can learn about the chef. They can read the menu. If there's something they encounter on the menu that they don't know what it is, ingredient or technique, you can look it up in advance. You can gain the knowledge before you go to the face-to-face experience or the dining experience. During the face-to-face event, the main event, foodies will tend to savor the full experience. It's not just about the food. It's not just about the content. It's also about the service, the decor, and the ambiance. I think this is also true for a very dynamic learning experience in a face-to-face environment. Foodies are also known for taking pictures of their food and chatting about it or tweeting it out on social media. This is sometimes frowned upon, but it happens all the time, and I think that happens too, and it should be allowed to happen in your dynamic face-to-face learning experience. Afterwards, foodies will often want to try the recipes, get the recipes, try the recipes, explore more of that cuisine, or learn more about that particular chef. They also want to share their stories about that meal and their pictures and the reviews of it with others. I think there's tons of parallels here between what happens in the foodie and dining experience with what we hope will happen with the learning experiences for our members. All right, kitchen cleanup. No matter how delicious that sandwich is, there's always a little bit of mess to deal with. So the challenges and downsides. This is a ton more work than just putting on a standalone event. I've worked with very progressive organizations that still struggle with this. Everyone's head and heart are in the right place. We want to do this. We understand the value to the member. But the resources change, the priorities in the organization change, the time just goes away. I don't know where it goes. But I think it's worth it. A project like this takes a lot of cross-team partnering and collaboration. That's a good thing in an organization. Most organizations are trying to achieve that anyway. It's still really hard. The old silos effect. Sometimes if someone in my department comes through and says, other department, we need X activity from you and we need it by this date, there's a sense that goes, your priority is not my priority. How do we combat that? It usually comes from the top. It usually comes from leadership saying this is important to the organization. This is important to our members. This is a new way of looking at things, of integrating our offerings to a larger audience and being more valuable to our members over time. Still hard, but I think it needs that kind of buy-in from the top. Change is hard. We all know that's true. One of the big challenges here is educating attendees for their behavior change. I mean, we can do all of this, but they aren't necessarily going to play in the sandbox that we've created for them. So in the sense of doing homework before they come to an event. I've been posting a virtual bread ahead of live events for years, and only incrementally have I been able to move the needle on whether people will actually engage with that pre-event content or not. A lot of it has to do with the way you promote it. Again, you can't just expect people to accidentally stumble upon this great virtual content ahead of time and savor it. You kind of have to tell them it's there. You have to tell them why it matters, why it's worth their time before they even get to the conference, what's in it for them. And then you need to tell them again, and you need to tell them again, and maybe one more time. Again, I think it's worth it. So here we are at the wrap-up. I want to say basically, I realize that I've left you with a ton of potential ideas, a ton of options, and very few concrete answers. I'm sorry. Again, I'll say this whole concept is limited only by your resources and by your imagination. I will strongly recommend that you keep the learner in mind as you do all of this. Sometimes it's really tempting to plan your virtual content or your, I think Ron was talking about how later in the year, HighRoad will be pushing out nuggets of great content from this two-day event. And I think that's awesome. I think that's absolutely fantastic. That's really what we're talking about. But I would caution you to do it again with the learner in mind, not just with the organization's agenda. Quite often I'll see organizations push out cool content, but it's very clearly with their own needs in mind. They want me to register for a new event, or sign up for this, or buy that, or something else. It's cool. I'm glad I have that content, but it seems to be clearly, weighted in favor of the organization. I worked with a different organization that did the same thing, wanted to push out little nuggets of captured content from their event, and but they did it around what they knew about their attendees, their members. So, for example, a segment of their members were tax accountants. So, leading into tax season, but not in the middle of it, because tax people, once you're in tax season, they don't have time to be looking at your nuggets of content. So that had to be timed at a time when it was useful to them as they were preparing for tax season, pushed out some cool nuggets of content that might help those people do their jobs better during that season. That was very much appreciated. It wasn't necessarily tied to a subscription campaign or a renewal or a new product to be purchased. So I think you can see other ways that might be relevant to your own situation. So I'm going to stop here with the words of a fine musician, Warren Zevon. His probably most recognizable hit was Werewolves of London. He was known as an innovator, a disruptor. He lived hard. He died young. He was asked towards the end of his life for some advice on life. And he said, basically, don't take it all too seriously. Life is short. Make sure you enjoy every sandwich. So bon appetit, and thank you very much. Questions on helping to work with your organization?
if you're talking about digital and using Anne's analogy there, that's a whole lot of email that would be a lot more interesting than my pet peeve, which is early bird register now. Just saying. Just saying. That's always the thing. Any other comments? Or, I might pick out on you, Dave, and because you guys are doing this a lot, especially on the content part. And can you give us like a little brief on how you've changed some of your event marketing for D2C with the content part of it? Because you're doing this. You're actually doing this virtual sandwich. So you just talk about how you've been using blogs, et cetera, just real quick. Okay, so you know how you switched recently?
We still do early bird messaging. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah, skip me.
All right, so here's what Dave's done, because he's forgotten. So Dave has started to, instead of they used to just send emails saying register. He's incorporated now into actually having their brand journalists actually write compelling content that's actually starting to get their exhibitors and things interested in starting to put out those nuggets to lead them down a better path for engagement for the event. Is that a good summary? Okay, fantastic. All right, so any other questions for Anne? Okay, thank you so much, Anne.